It's time for another edition of the Blue-White Illustrated Penn State Football and Recruiting Podcast. He's Ryan Snyder. He's back from Colorado. I'm Greg Pickel, back from Indianapolis. We were out on the road for a little bit of everything over the last week, but obviously the big news of last week was denied Dennis Sutton picking Penn State. The big news of this week, we have a lot of places to get to today. We'll talk conference realignment. We'll talk a new commitment. We'll talk scheduled commitments. Ryan, as always, when we get close to August, the college football world is buzzing, and the Penn State world right now is spinning at a speed unlike really anything we've seen in a long time.
Yeah, 10 commitments, man. This was a heck of a run. I think our first podcast, we hit a little bit on that June, July run a couple of years ago. I think that finished around 13, I believe. So that was, of course, over a little bit longer period of stretch here. So this is unlike anything we've really seen with Franklin. And we did kind of expect it, though. I don't want to pretend like it's totally unexpected. Some of the guys who have committed, weren't always right on the radar, but it's a heck of a run. We knew it was going to happen with all those official visits, and Penn State has gotten a job done here now, going up on 22 commitments, and more to come, it seems like, in the days ahead.
Well, as everyone knows, we talk a lot of recruiting on this show, and we're going to get to all of that. Cam Miller's commitment, a couple of scheduled ones for later in the week. But we want to start with the news of the week in college football. Oklahoma and Texas, right before we started recording here on Tuesday, July 27, officially applying for membership to the SEC starting in 2025. There's a lot of talk that could happen sooner, despite the legalities that stand in the way of it currently. Ryan, just your initial thoughts first on when you first heard the news. What was your reaction? And obviously, this was not something that happened in a couple of days. This has been in the works for a long time. And I think that the Big 12 seemingly was definitely caught off guard. But, it's not a huge shock that these two schools decided to do this, but it certainly is going to shake up the way the college football landscape looks in the future and works over the next few years.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I think is just that it's a race to build the first national conference. And, that's probably not going to play out right away, maybe even take a few more years. But that's the direction I feel like this is heading. And, whether the SEC starts grabbing more schools or whether the Big Ten expands to, out west or what everybody's talking about, only time will really tell. But to me, Power Five and that kind of talk seems to be kind of dead to me. It feels like this is going to be a race for the Power Two in my eyes, and the Big Ten should be that second conference. So I've seen a lot of talk about what was it, the Pac-12 schools, the California schools. I think Andy Staples even brought up something about adding, Oregon and Washington. Will that happen right away? I don't see that. I think the Big Ten can sit and be pretty happy where they're at right now. But long term, I feel like it has to expand. It will expand. What happens with the ACC long term? They have that grant of rights well into the 2030s. But to me, that the schools that really make sense for the Big Ten are Virginia and North Carolina. So one thing I'll be curious to watch is how the Big 12 grant of rights and that talk works in court, because if that gets shot down by the courts is something that can't really hold up, I think that kind of opens up the ACC a little bit. And the ACC should remain strong. I don't want to pretend like that's going to get shattered, but there are definitely some schools in that conference that make sense for the Big Ten. And, if they wanted to go out west and grab the California schools, that really would make them the true power conference, at least until the SEC makes more moves.
Yeah, there's no question. I mean, obviously, Oklahoma, Texas, and the SEC is where we start this conversation, but certainly there's a lot that's going to happen across the sport in the next couple of months, in the next couple of years, in the next 5 to 10 years. And I mean, when you talk about the future of the Big Ten, Ryan, to me, I just don't know if they're equipped to move quickly. It just doesn't feel like they are. They've always been very methodical. Kevin Warren seems to be in no rush to do much of anything, whether it's related to COVID or alignment or anything else. So I don't think that there's going to be a rush for the Big Ten to go and suddenly race into a decision-making process when it relates to getting maybe more teams on board, be it a Virginia or North Carolina, depending on legality, be it the Pac-12. I mean, there's a lot of decisions still to be made, and I believe it was ESPN reported that maybe the next step is starting to schedule some non-conference games with some Pac-12 teams. But a lot of the schedules are set already. So if you're going to do that, you're going to be buying out a group of 5 schools, I think, to do it. And I just don't know if that's something that can happen, that can take place fast enough to really make an impact. We'll see. There's a lot to get to here, obviously, and things will continuously change as the things unfold, because everyone's in a bit of a scramble mode right now. But a change is coming, whether it's good for the sport, bad for the sport. There's a lot of people who think this is about the worst thing that could possibly happen to college athletics, but name, image, and likeness was the first step to all of this, and you just followed the money. And it's always been that way, right? I mean, it's always been that way. If you want to chase the college football playoff trophy, you need to be where the best teams are, the best recruiting happens, the best everything, really. And if that's all this stuff is just a reflection of that. And I thought one thing that was interesting that I believe it was Sports Illustrated that floated it out there was this whole situation is going to make it hard for college football playoff expansion to happen by 2023, it seems like. So that's another wrinkle to all of this. But all told, the game's changing. Whether the Big Ten merges with the Pac-12 or picks off its best teams, whether it gets some ACC schools in the hunt, change is coming. And again, it may not be tomorrow. It may not be within the next couple of years, but it's on the horizon. It's here. And Texas, Oklahoma, and the SEC will ultimately be remembered as the ones who kicked it off.
Yeah, it's no longer about cable boxes anymore.
Right.
The Big Ten tried that, and Rutgers and Maryland have been good members, I guess you could say. But this is really now about just getting brands, and that's what this next realignment adjustment will be all about. And that's why, to me, picking up an Iowa State, they work great for the conference. They have a natural rival. They're a good football program. Basketball has been good. But are they a brand that the Big Ten really could use to sell themselves, especially compared to a USC or some of those, even Stanford to some degree? That is the move I think the Big Ten would have to make at some point. I don't even really expect them to make a move this year, but I do think that will grow into something that we see long term, just because, look, the Pac-12 is already behind, the Big 12 is already behind financially, and as these two conferences continue to grow and separate themselves, there really is no more Power 5. That's kind of what I'm coming back to. And the Pac-12 is going to have to do something with this move on the horizon, and joining the Big 10 to some degree. At least those top schools. I don't think it'll be all of them, but some of those top schools making that move to some sort of alliance. It's the only move that makes sense long term, and that's why who knows what we'll see with the NCAA. But I think long term, it's no longer going to be 65 Power 5 schools.
Yep.
It feels like, to me, it's going to get whittled down to 40 or so, and sure, those other schools might be playing in Division I or FBS is what we call it, but there's a clear separation here, and it's only just going to keep growing.
Yeah, the graphic I've had up on the screen here from Big Ten Media Days, big life, big stage, Big Ten is what it said, and that's what you need, right? I mean, you need to be willing to make big moves in college athletics to stay up with the biggest teams and the richest teams and everything else. So it would be curious, really fascinating to see what takes place. To your point, Maryland and Rutgers, I think some listeners might be willing to argue with you about whether or not they've been good additions to the Big Ten. But, and that's the other thing, too. The Big Ten has such an enormous TV contract already that it maybe doesn't have to rush. I mean, the Longhorn Network was what it was. It was owned by ESPN, but I'm not really sure if it reached the revenue point that they thought it would.
No.
The ACC network, where do you even find it? You have to, it's almost impossible. If you want to watch, it's like it's on, it was Root Sports. I forget who owns it now. But at any rate, you can't find it. The Pac-12 network, good luck finding that on most cable packages. It's tough if you don't have DirecTV. So the Big Ten network is all over the place. And that is a big, big part of how the conference has grown and financially and everything else. So they're in a pretty good place right now. But obviously, to your point, it's about building with brands. It's not about just building with anyone. And that's why when you hear talk of an Iowa State or Kansas, and, obviously Kansas is a tremendous basketball program, but is basketball really the future? how much, I guess the question is, how much is basketball a part of the revenue future? And, you get a lot of money for the farther you go in the NCAA tournament, and that kind of stuff helps. But are you looking for schools with more football and some basketball, or all basketball, no football, all football, no basketball? That's going to be the question. We'll see. But there's just no doubt, Ryan, it's going to be the driving factor of conversation in the sport even after the season begins. It'll die down a little bit, but it's not going away.
Absolutely, man. One thing I'll add is just, Kentucky basketball is huge. North Carolina basketball is huge. I don't know about Duke, but I know Kentucky and North Carolina football make more than their basketball. And I wouldn't be surprised if Duke football is similar, but I'm not exactly sure about them. It's same with Kansas too. Kansas basketball might make more than Kansas football, but the point remains that almost all of these schools make more money off of football than basketball, and that's what drives all of this. So, one thing I want to throw to you is, the only way Penn State could ever leave the Big Ten, and I don't ever think it's going to happen, let me clarify that, but the only thing that makes sense to me is if Notre Dame actually joined the ACC, and then that would be a major pool for them. That's the only way I could ever see Penn State maybe even considering it. But I also don't think Penn State's leadership is very aggressive with that stuff. I think, do I see Ohio State leaving? No, but I know their leadership's more aggressive with that stuff. Nebraska's always been kind of outspoken about, wanting more, I guess, out of this Big Ten agreement. I would just be curious to see if those schools poke their noses around. I don't. Ohio State's not going anywhere. Let me clarify that. But the only way I could ever see Penn State considering it is if Notre Dame joined the ACC, and then maybe some other big-time program I'm not thinking about at the moment. And then if you added a Penn State into that, those three schools would significantly raise that conference. But, at the end of the day, there's a reason the Big Ten's making I think it's maybe $20 million more per year per school currently. And the ACC has a long way to go to catch up to that. So you got to add the Irish to even have a chance for Penn State to consider it, in my opinion.
Yeah, and what is the long-term, that's the other part of this conversation, what is the long-term outlook for Notre Dame? It will stay independent as long as it possibly can, and that's not going to change. And, they had a workaround for them in the college football playoff expansion discussions, if you believe the reports that are out there, which there's every reason to believe the reports that are out there. So, we're talking about a school that has always been able to work its way around being an independent, even during a season where a worldwide pandemic caused mostly conference play only. It found a way to get itself in a position to be fine. So that's another part of this too. How long do they stay independent? Do conferences, obviously the SEC is not going anywhere, but at what point do we get to like you said, a power two, and that's it? And it's a fascinating conversation. We could spend hours talking about this, and we will as the future unfolds, because there's just so many ways that this will fundamentally change the sport, and you just don't know what's going to be around the corner next.
Nope. Should really probably said power three. We'll include the ACC in that for now, but just long term, man, especially with that grant of rights for the ACC, it goes to 2037, I think the number is. That's going to obviously drag, maybe all this Power 2 talk or major changes just in all of FBS. That'll drag things out for probably at least a decade. But once we get further down the road, man, I see these two conferences just going on a whole different direction financially compared to the other three. And that's why I think, the Big 12's days are definitely numbered. The Pac-12's days may be numbered. They're going to need to make some major moves. Although I would say one thing I'll add is I think it would be cool if some of those Big 12 schools like Oklahoma State, Kansas State, Iowa State, if some of them did join the Pac-12, I think it would help them for a little bit. Maybe I don't even know what would happen with the AAC, but I don't know. I love this talk, man. I think it's cool, and I'm happy we're talking about it. I think fans are really interested into it. I know I was reading about it a lot last week. So just sports business in general has always been a topic I really like, and I know this will have my attention for a good couple months as we move down the road.
Well, if you like the conversation, hit the subscribe button. Make sure you ding that bell so you get a notification whenever a new Blue-White Illustrated video comes up on YouTube. If you're listening on Spotify or another podcast platform, hit subscribe, leave us some feedback. Let us know what you think about the show and what you want us to discuss in the future. You can, of course, read all of our content at bwi.rivals.com. And Ryan, right now the content is the message board, the Lions Pride message board, which is our premium spot, of course, for conversation about Penn State, college football, and everything else. It's hot on realignment and it's hot on recruiting, and our front page is recruiting heavy. It has been all month. As you mentioned, 10 commits this month, 22 so far in the class of 2022. And when you really break it all down, it's just been a tremendous run. The latest win for Penn State, Cam Miller, the three-star corner out of Florida, picking Penn State over Virginia Tech. And we obviously got a chance to see him, or you did anyway, when he visited campus. We have not had a chance to catch up with him too much, but we talked to a trainer. We've talked to some people down there. And this is a guy who I think if he played in a different state, probably has a lot more eyeballs, but he's in Florida. Obviously, the recruiting scene down there is just crazy. There's so many FBS players, and maybe he flew under the radar a little bit, but this is a quality pickup for Penn State and a guy who a lot of people think is in line for a ratings bump down the road.
Yeah. I think Rivals maybe has him a little underrated right now. Probably a higher 3-star, low 4-star is probably what I think should happen. And that's mainly from talking to sources, because I can't pretend that I know Cam well. I watch the highlight films like all of you. I've watched 1 or 2 complete game films, but Cam's not really one to open up much. Just from talking to people at Penn State, I know he really impressed them when he came up for his unofficial visit on June 7th, and that's really, the ball was rolling before then, but that's when it really became, realistic, I guess, to say that he could end up here. At the time, we were talking about Brian Dilworth a good bit, and he actually worked out for Penn State. And that's kind of what I thought would maybe be the difference between Dilworth and Miller. But Penn State clearly saw enough from him on film and, the information that they've gathered to make this move. So he didn't work out on June 7th, but he really impressed the staff, from a maturity standpoint and whatnot. It was a really good visit. And from that point forward, it became clear that he was very high on Terry Smith's board. As far as numbers and what he runs and stuff, he hasn't done too many camps. We hear high 4.4, low 4.5s, and I'd love to see him at a camp at some point. But he primarily played quarterback last season. Did play a little bit of defense. Was mainly more of a safety from what I've seen. And now that he's making this move to Trinity Christian, where he previously played at Fernandina Beach, which is north of Jacksonville. He's joining a powerhouse program in Jacksonville now. They actually won the 3A state championship last year. So I'll be really curious to see how he transitions there and, what position he focuses on. I would assume he'll play more cornerback or at least more defensive back there. I would think that's part of this move. Before he transitions, up to Penn State. So he'll also be playing great competition. Not that he was already playing. There's a lot of good schools in Jacksonville, so he was already playing some good schools. But I know Trinity Christian plays American Heritage next year. That's actually a game I'm trying to maybe schedule and take a flight down there. We'll see what happens. So curious to see how that works out. As far as his film, hips and bursts. Those are the two things, and you can kind of see that from him playing quarterback. Just from the way he runs the triple option. Well, doesn't really run a triple option, but you know what I mean. But just great closing speed, man. The kid can move on a swivel, and I think those are the two reasons why Penn State sees him as a corner more than a safety. Where I know some other people talk safety more than corner. So when I look at that film, I see a guy who can move pretty quick. And when I compare it to Jordan Allen, Jordan Allen has more of the ball skills. He breaks well on balls and whatnot, but he's not as quick with his hips. So I think that's something that Cam Miller brings a bit more of. But it's a good player. I wish I could say I knew him well. I've been trying to get in touch with him for a while now, Greg.
We thought we were close at one point, but didn't happen. It will one day.
We'll get in touch with him at some point. He's not much of a talker, but that's okay, man. He seems all about his business. When he committed the other day, he got straight to the point. Said that he's kind of a business guy. Has big goals. So I'm looking forward to getting to know him more. But I know Terry Smith loves him, and that's one thing I can really say with confidence is that this was somebody on Terry's board who he didn't want to miss out on, especially after Gould and Bellamy went to USC and Notre Dame. So once that happened, it was clear that Cam Miller was someone they had to get, and that's why they brought him back, for an official visit at the end of the month. And really, I kind of thought after that visit that he was Penn State's to lose, and Virginia Tech stayed in the mix. One other thing, I'm sorry, I'll keep going on here, but Ryan Smith, Terry Smith. Ryan Smith's the defensive back coach down at Virginia Tech. He was a grad assistant here at Penn State, so it was kind of a mentor versus a mentee kind of thing. And Terry Smith won out. So great pickup for Penn State. They seem really confident about it, and hopefully in the months ahead I can go down and see him and get a better feel for what he brings.
Yeah, I think Thomas Frank Carr said it in his film eval and also wrote it in the story that accompanied that. You can find that at bwi.rivals.com. Also on the Blue-White Illustrated YouTube page. Search Blue-White Illustrated in the search bar, and all those film evals of these 10 commits plus a lot more will pop up. But he said that basically in his mind it came down to getting a talented, speedy guy into the program that can play a number of different positions, and you think he's a corner, but sometimes it just comes down to when you have an athlete like this, get him in the fold, figure it out when he gets there. If maybe your initial thought was wrong, you can move him somewhere else. So good get for Penn State, Ryan. Another good get for Penn State fans. You're going to like this transition. A good get for Penn State fans is the 2021 Penn State football preview magazine from Blue-White Illustrated. It's out. It's 116 pages. It's full color. It's an exclusive and comprehensive guide to the Nittany Lions season as James Franklin gets set to start his 8th in Happy Valley. Visit colemanpub.com/BWI-preview for the opportunity to order that. You can find it on newsstands around the Pennsylvania area, or you can call customer service 814-234-1177. Ryan, as we look at the rest of the week here, so one thing I think fans realize is that when you get hot on the commitment trail, it can really crank things up to a level like the one we've seen for Penn State. But you've been doing this a long time. This is unlike there's not too many situations that have presented themselves at Penn State over the years like this one, where you come off of a Monday commitment, and this is not the first time it's even happened in July, where you come off a commitment on day one, or the first day of a week, knowing that there's more on the horizon. 2 more commitments scheduled for the week. Let's start with Cristian Driver. He is a very, very talented recruit out of Texas, the son of former NFL star Donald Driver. He's seen as a safety by Penn State, rated as an athlete by Rivals, a 4-star who has a unanimous future cast, including one from you, for the Nittany Lions. Let's talk about where things stand heading into his decision. We're taping this on Tuesday, July 27, depending on when you're listening to this. It's not out of the question that he could have announced already. He will make his choice known Thursday, July 29, which also is his birthday.
Yeah, well, first off, you're getting good at those promo reads, Greg. Keep it up, buddy.
One day at a time. That's right. One show at a time.
We're learning. So, look, all signs point to Penn State here. I think that's been the case now for a little while. Wisconsin was in the mix, and then they kind of asked him to hold off and visit it during the season. And to me, that was Wisconsin, maybe trying to figure out whether they need him positionally or whether they just were focusing on another player. But usually when a school asks you to hold off on a visit, it's because they're focused kind of somewhere else. So this, like I said, all signs really point to Penn State. We know Oklahoma and Texas A&M were keeping him warm, but they clearly had other prospects ahead of him too. Mississippi State and Michigan State kind of made a later push in June to get him on campus. From what I understand, that never happened. He's gone quiet over the last 3 days, and visits have been open. So I guess he technically could have visited in the last 2 days or so, but I don't believe he has. Penn State seems pretty confident, and really just the big question I have is just where he fits long term at Penn State. We know he's a great athlete. We know, like you said, James Franklin has really strong ties with Donald Driver, and that really was the big crunch here because that's a relationship that goes back to James coaching in Green Bay. Cristian gave me a quote a while back about how James was more of a second father in some ways, that they've actually stayed in touch a lot.
And they only were together for a season, which is the fascinating part of that to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but it just, you build those bonds, man. So, they've stayed in touch. And James is a very charismatic person. And I'm not surprised at all that, he kept in touch with Donald, whose son is an up-and-coming prospect. Not that it's, fake or anything, but, he knew this. Yeah. He knew this young man was going to be a good player. But where he fits long-term is the main question. Everything that he's told us is that he wants to play wide receiver. But when I really look at his film, and I think a lot of other people agree, he would be a heck of a safety, man. I mean, he really reads the run well, and he's a great tackler. Those are 2 things that just really kind of stand out to me on film. So what happens, we'll see. I kind of think, if he's dead set on receiver, Penn State will give him that chance at wide receiver. But long term, I see a better safety prospect. So, he's another player I'd like to get some times for and see how he runs and see how he moves. And I think that would help us figure out, where he best projects. But we know he's a great player. We know he plays for a great program in Texas. And look, he's another guy I'd love to travel down to see this fall. So we're trying to make some plans, trying to get that done.
All right, well, we'll see if James Franklin's smiling on Thursday afternoon, evening, whenever Cristian Driver announces. Again, bwi.rivals.com. We'll keep you updated as we learn more there. Then on Saturday, the last day of July, I'm pretty sure it's the last day of July, we have one last commitment in this month involving Penn State. So KJ Winston, 4-star out of Maryland, DeMatha Catholic. Everyone knows that they produce tons of players every year. KJ Winston's one of the latest ones. He's down to Penn State. He's down to Maryland. Like Driver, future cast currently unanimous for the Nittany Lions. He was going to wait. You've talked about this on previous podcasts. He was going to wait until his mom's birthday in late August to make his choice known, even though he was going to tell the school of his choice and, of course, the team that finished runner-up about his decision well before that. Somebody must have said to him, this is not the greatest idea if you want to control your announcement, because word's going to get out either, in any number of different ways. So he moves the announcement day up to July 31st, and Penn State is seemingly in pretty good position heading into the weekend.
Yeah. It's down to Penn State and Maryland. He's made that clear. And I think Maryland had its foot in the door at one point. And gave them something to think about. Maybe they were kind of 50-50 more than anything, but Penn State's been the favorite to me for months now. I logged my future cash right after his Penn State visit, and that was right before he visited Maryland. And since, like I said, since then, it felt like the Terps maybe gave him something to think about. But long term, I feel like his heart is set on Penn State, and he'd be another great safety prospect. We got to watch him a little bit up here. DeMatha came up and played on the 7-on-7, and there's not a lot of running in 7-on-7, so we didn't get to watch much of or tackling really. So we didn't get to watch much from that. But just reads the quarterback well. That was a big thing we took away from that. Can play across, play with slots across the middle, steps up a little bit. So, just another solid prospect that you got to land. This is somebody who Penn State's been on for a long time, and from a character perspective and maturity and all that stuff, he would fit in really well in that secondary. So I have Penn State here, and his commitment would move it up to 24. I think that's we're getting to that point now where it's really going to probably be the best player after that. Whether it's 25, 26, 27. 27 seems like a stretch to me, but definitely I could see a 25th, maybe a 26. But who it's going to be, man, is really tough, because there are a lot of good options out there and a lot of players who I think would like to be part of this program still. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, if Penn State gets Driver, gets Winston, we'll find out again Thursday and Saturday, respectively. That puts them at 24. Ryan, let's close with a lightning round of questions here. First, Lonnie White obviously has picked Pittsburgh. He's going to play baseball. Just quick thought on that and what it does for Penn State's scholarship table in terms of opening up space either this year, next year, or in the future.
Mm-hmm. I mean, to me, when they took Tyler Johnson, when they did, that was kind of the sign to me that Penn State at least was preparing for Lonnie Johnson not to be here. I think they knew at the time that there was a very good chance that he was not going to end up playing football. And, of course, that ended up being the case. What was it, $1.5 million was his contract deal? Hey, man, awesome for him. I'm so happy for Lonnie. He and his family were just so good to me throughout the process. He's another kind of quiet guy, but when you get him on the phone, you can tell that his maturity is just on a different level. So he's not somebody I see wasting that 1.5. I think he'll invest it right. On the diamond, he seems to be a heck of a player too. So I could see him definitely making some good money down there. Whether he makes it to the MLB or not, we'll see. But I could definitely see him moving through the ranks and giving it a real shot. So, but back to your actual question, like I said, I felt like when they added Tyler Johnson, that was kind of that move. And then, you still have guys like Andre Green, who's actually supposed to be visiting Penn State today, Tuesday, July 27th. Do I see Andre Green ending up here? No, I really don't. I think he's going to probably end up down south. But then you also have Darius Clemens, too, who took an official visit at the end of June, seems to be considering Auburn, maybe Oregon a little bit. I kind of feel like Auburn's the main competitor there, but he's in no rush to decide. So he's another player I could see coming back for a game, maybe even the Auburn game, for an unofficial visit since he already took his official. So
Right.
He's a guy who's definitely still in the mix, and same with Andre Green. But really, to me, locking up Tyler Johnson was that scholarship.
All right, lightning round number 2. You have a list of guys inside the den on the premium board about who's on campus this week during this short quiet period. The one guy who stands out to you the most, you can give me 2, one on each side of the ball, or just one in general. Who jumps off that list to you? Obviously, it's pretty extensive. You can get the full thing inside the den. But for you, who are the couple of guys that really stand out?
Well, Andre Green, I just mentioned, he's a superstar. We got to watch him at the Baltimore Under Armour camp, and just the comparisons to some of the the NFL's best really felt that way. Just compared to some of the guys we've seen, at least when I started my career, that have moved up. Just long, lot of length, runs great. Already has his route running down pat. There's just so much to like about him. Joshua Miller is another 2023 O-lineman who's expected to come up today. He's a player that I got to see at Rivals Camp in Atlanta. He pretty dominated that camp, I thought. Maybe not dominated. I might be a little strong, but he was definitely one of the top 3 or so linemen there. So he's someone to keep an eye on. But really, I think the guys that are coming this weekend are good. I don't want to get into too many of them because we try and keep some of that stuff on the den. But one thing I will say is that the Lash Bash coming up this weekend is always a major event, and I would expect another 30 or so players there. We don't have an official list for that yet. Still kind of working on that, but I do expect quite a bit of talent from 2023, especially in Pennsylvania and Maryland, to be there. One guy I'm curious to watch in the days ahead, or maybe weeks ahead, is Antonio Tripp from McDonough. Nittany just committed last week. There's already been a ton of momentum there. And Antonio's someone I think's been leaning towards Penn State for months now. So I think if it was up to the kid, I think he'd probably be on board. I think his parents, want him to make sure he's making the right decision, which, you have however many months it is so he can sign. What is it,
a lot.
15? Yeah. So I trust me, I'm not questioning what the parents' thought process is. That's just kind of my opinion on the situation. So, but do I think he will be a Nittany Lion at some point? Yes. And I think there's a chance he'll be up here this weekend. So he's somebody to watch. And then, 2023 Pennsylvania is a stacked class. There's a lot of good players. I don't want to throw out names yet for who we're expecting just because I want to confirm it with those guys first. But, diehard recruiting fans should know how good that class is in Pennsylvania, and a good chunk of those guys will be here.
All right. Well, if you're not a diehard recruiting fan, you can become one by joining us inside the Lions Den. BWI.rivals.com for all the latest. Find us on YouTube, youtube.com/Blue-White Illustrated Video. Visit Coleman Publishing to find the latest news on the magazine. And as Ryan said, it's a busy week. 2 decisions on deck, the Lash Bash this weekend. And guess what, folks? Football camp is right around the corner. We've almost made it to the 2021 season. For Ryan Snyder, I'm Greg Pickel, and this has been Blue-White Illustrated Penn State Football and Recruiting Podcast. We'll catch you next time.